town council, we probably have to move pretty quickly on these recommendations, right?
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't say rush into it.
Not
I wouldn't
rush.
rush into
Or
something.
ask for an extension at fall meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would rather you get an extension and do it the right way, rather than rush it and miss something.
Okay, just so everyone knows the timeline, because when I just heard August the other day, I was like, oh,
So-
that's,
That's me.
it's updates. All right, so the questions that we drafted were sent to Jim.
One of the commissions.
And he has some explanations, ideas that he wants to go
Yeah.
through, and Glenn also looked
Okay, I better
through
disarm
them
this
as
thing.
well.
So, Ally, if you don't mind, I'll just kind of, this was from some time ago, and I'll just kind of run down some of them. For example, first item on my list was Chapter 13 bonds. There was no question, so my question is, what is the question on that one?
Chapter 13 bonds. So
Ally,
we,
when did you send this out? I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it.
Doug, do you know when I sent it out? I can re-email it.
I can find out real quick. It was in email around the end of April.
It says chapter 13 bonds. No questions were raised on this chapter. I'm just looking at the minutes from April 28th.
May 5th?
Maybe there were questions raised at a future meeting, but on that meeting, there were no questions raised.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in really quickly here. We wanted to maximize the use of your time, so we went
Email it out
through
right now again.
and reviewed the various provisions of the bylaws that impacted Select Board and the Town Administrator, so that we could, gather all of our questions, in one session. So I guess with respect to Chapter 13, we didn't really have any
I don't
questions,
think we raised
did we?
any questions on chapter
Okay,
13.
so, good. So my response was, what is the question? So if there's nothing there. Okay.
Yeah.
So Chapter 17, Building Committee, permanent. The bullet point was additional language for when the permanent building committee is required to be engaged. Bullet point number 1, manage construction project versus self-managed. Additional parameters required, monetary type of project. Bullet point 3, permanent building to decide involvement is required by the committee for the large capital projects. So my general comment on that was, what's the question? Generally, for projects under $2 million, they have not been involved at all. One project that comes to mind is the DPW garage and the Fisher School renovation that took place when I was still the assistant. The language that is currently written now is pretty specific. They're responsible for construction of additions for municipal buildings. If you're looking to change this, I would say change it to any project over $2 million, because the way escalation is going, it could be a generator project, technically, that is $285,000. My other comment is, I'd be hesitant about setting some type of blanket, speaking on behalf of the select board, but that's just my, being here 18 years as the assistant and then the town administrator, just kind of my broad overview. The smaller projects, especially the capital improvement ones, like East Walpole Fire, we've taken on a few times. Don Anderson's basically managed that project on his own, done it. Well, this is the second time we've done it. We used some ARPA funds that were earmarked from the state. It was only about $100,000 this time around, so, to create separate bunk rooms for each person. So I'll take any questions you might have about permanent building then. I know I'm kind of all over the place, but I wanted to cover, from a, boots on the ground, here's really how it works type of thing.
My only comment, just real quick, is that if we choose a number, 2 million, then that might make sense today, but inflation is what it is, and 10 years from now, I don't know how often we review the bylaws, but, and whether or not we review it every 5 years, but whether or not we address the $2 million number in 5 years. It could sit there at $2 million, and our budget could, as the budgets tend to do, go up 2.5% per year, and that $2 million could become kind of like an artificially low number. So a percent of the total overall budget makes more sense to me, 2% of the overall budget, or there could be another formula, but a formula kind of makes more sense than a flat number. That's just a thought I had.
And I think our thought was also, we discussed whether permanent building kind of had a vote to vet it in or out. Whether they, right now, the permanent building committee is not fully, it only has 3 members still, correct?
Yeah,
Not 7.
There's 4 listed on the website, but there's only 3.
Yeah.
So would
Keith
be
is not active.
to just say, permanent building, take a quick look, say, should we, say yes, we feel that this is something we should be involved, or no? And that's why it was looking for that more specific language of when do they get called in.
Like the facilities going on right now up at 1A Fields, right? You know, that's a municipal building. But 1A Fields themselves were a municipal building.
They were not.
It was a capital project. But, you know, Permanent Building Committee thought that we should have oversight on that
Yeah.
all along, you know, given the value of the project.
Sorry if I can interrupt. Does the select board appoint the permanent building committee?
Yeah. So it also is pretty specific. It says a lawyer, architect, engineer on there, and then I think 4 other at-large, except if it's a school building, and then the school superintendent participates as an ex officio member. So right now, we don't have I don't believe we have I know we don't have a lawyer, pretty sure we don't have an architect or an engineer. I did ask town council for clarification on that one. She basically explained the select board, the appointing authority, can try its best to appoint that person, and in lieu of that, they can appoint someone who may be qualified as they determine. So honestly, in my time here, I don't ever recall us having a lawyer on there, so.
David?
Everyone's looking in my direction.
Actually, someone who's an engineer said that they may be interested that I know, so I'm gonna reach out to them again and say, you know, put your name out there.
So I guess the other question, though, is if we don't have an active building project going on, do we need a fully appointed permanent building committee anyway?
Not necessarily, and we, like you just said, we only have really 3 active members right now.
So is,
And
they're
that, but
active
that's
in-
only active because of the school building
Yeah.
committee project.
to that point, Jeff, how could we ask you, as the suggestion was that the planning board committee could decide if they wanted to take on a project, if it didn't actually exist, if it wasn't fully appointed, then really, how would they make that decision? It would go to the select board in that case, or we would appoint a committee to make that decision.
You know,
You understand what I'm saying?
we've talked about it, and you, like you said, we don't want to get involved in $1.5 million window replacement project somewhere.
Sure.
You know, Donnie Anderson does not need us, you know, looking over his shoulder, reporting into us, or meeting with us once every 2 weeks. Doesn't need that, that's, you know, bureaucratic oversight, that's just not needed.
Yeah.
But, you know, I just think there needs to be, you know, is it just municipal buildings? Is it, you know, capital projects, capital infrastructure projects? You know, I mean, do we start getting involved in water and sewer projects that, you know, if we take on a $10 million water sewer project? So it's always been buildings, but then if we look at, you know, something like the 1A Fields, which, you know, many of us thought we should have been involved in and we weren't, then we expand it to capital projects, right? Or maybe you could define that, but, yeah, but then again, I don't think permanent buildings should have anything to do with water and sewer. So I wanna make sure that if we determine language here, that it's really around, you know, municipal projects that aren't water and sewer related either.
So could I ask a
The
question?
last time we built
Delaney
it,
treatment plant.
What?
The Delaney treatment plant, that was before me.
that was exempt from,
So there was no permanent building committee
no,
involved?
because, well, they deemed it wasn't a building.
Oh, okay.
It was a
Infrastructure project?
facility,
Facility, yeah,
so it didn't come under that,
Project.
which is true, it is a big facility.
yeah, yeah.
People don't
So-
usually
So,
congregate.
Jim, can you summarize for us, so how do we decide when a permanent building committee, when a project is gonna go for the permanent building committee? Is it size, is it case by case?
So like, I understand where Jeff's coming from with the fields, he's used that. No one raised the issue real hard, pushed it. Technically, it's not a building structure, it's a field, yes, it's an infrastructure improvement. But they didn't participate. And the building for the DPW, Tom Pergicani's building, they didn't participate in the process at all. And I think honestly, that was because they were stretched a bit too thin at the time. We were building 3 buildings all at once in addition to that garage, so.
We did get updates
Yeah.
during the construction, you know, on how it was coming along, where the budget was. We did get those kind of
But
updates.
compared to these, the 3
Yeah, we didn't,
that were.
we didn't weigh in on, you know, change requests or anything like that. That was something DPW did, but they did provide us status updates.
I don't know that you wanna necessarily say not water and sewer projects, because perhaps you won't do it water sewer projects most of the time, but maybe there is a case where you build a treatment plant and you do wanna.
Or
so you
maybe,
wanna have
you
some
know, a new
flexibility.
water tower up in, you know, North
Don't-
Walpole or
Wouldn't you
something.
rather have flexibility than not, in that situation?
Well, I was just thinking if
And you don't want 2 boards and 2 commissions, you know, kind of, you don't want too much oversight either.
What I was also just thinking, just with like the middle school and what permanent building did, even though there's only 3 members, and just the interviewing of all the contractors and that whole process of going through that. I mean, in the field sense, since that when they're not involved, are all of that interviewing just going through you and the select board typically?
For the fields?
The fields,
No,
before the
like,
contracts were signed and things like that with
Oh,
the
it went through the
contractors?
select board, yeah.
No, like, think about the CM at risk for a school building, right?
Right.
Yeah, the 3 permanent building committee members were part of the interview process for that. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly, like, so it kind of depends on the building and what's going on.
No, I mean, I may just be spitballing here, but I know that there's a desire to have the building committee involved in the larger projects, but there's also a need for flexibility. So would it be appropriate to say that the building committee is consulted on projects above a certain amount, but they have a right of refusal if
I
they're
would say-
stretched too thin, or if,
My thought is, if you could put, I guess, a somewhat vague description in there, projects of significant impact to the, I mean, that's relatively vague, but it says, okay, this is a significant, a project of significance, let's bring it to the select board and let them, or, you know, the
Ultimately,
appointing
if the
authority.
administrator says it's not significant, the building committee says it is, it's gonna be up to the
It's gonna
select.
be up to the select board. Yeah.
I'm looking for something that triggers, you know, they're involved or not. It doesn't go through administration, doesn't go through select board. It's a.
You want
hey,
black and white.
It meets this criteria, they're involved. That's what I'm looking for.
What does that look like?
See, I like gray.
Well, I think it also kind of goes into that chapter 22, which then we were like, well, if there's the permanent building, and then the building maintenance advisory committee, we're like, when do these committees that are supposed to be overseeing our building, when are they called in? Because neither board are full, they're
One
fully
has
appointed.
no.
yeah.
But black and white would say building, and gray would say fields, which you're saying you were
Well, if
involved
we
with,
change
so.
the language from municipal building to, you know, municipal significant
Projects.
project of some sort, I don't know.
It sounds like you guys need to think about this a little bit more, and
But also, it's just so you know kind of where our discussions have been leading to, of what type of language we want to add in. Whether it's a monetary amount, saying 2 million, anything above, a vote by the permanent building, you know, committee, whether they want in, or they feel like they can vote out, that no, they don't need to be involved. And it also goes to the part that it's really hard to fill committees and have them actively filled for an extended period of time.
What are the terms, Jeff, on permanent building committee?
I think it's an in-depth.
we do reappoint them, I remember.
I get a letter every once in a while, I don't know when.
I think it's 3 years.
3 years, so, yeah, so if there's no projects for 3 years, then there probably will be no permanent building committee, so you can't really go to the permanent building committee and ask them, because they might not exist.
They may not exist.
And I didn't want to ask because I don't know what the quorum is right now, so.
So then if you have a project coming up, then you reappoint a permanent building committee?
I think that sounds right, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. When the library came up, that was my first project in Walpole, and we hadn't done something for a long time. That permanent building committee, from what I remember reading, is it was active up until the high school, and then they ceased being active because there was no building project going on, and then they reappointed.
High school, then Elm Street, right? There was some.
They were both around the same time, but then it ended. And then for a period of, 7 to 10 years, there was no building there. And they weren't active at all. Because I remember I had never known David Wildenhauer. He came forward and he was involved in the library. I think he's still a library trustee, so I just know they were not active.
All right.
I mean, I know the potential for something up at the schools, I mean, feasibility, design, all that kind of stuff. That's gonna be significant, $40, $50 million, whatever it's gonna be. It's not gonna be MSBA, so it's not gonna need the requirements of what the MSBA needs for school building committees. So it would fall under the permanent building committee, in my opinion, at what point?
3 years.
3 years.
Okay.
Do we call the permanent building, like for Johnson, if that gets major renovations, is the permanent building committee called in for that as well?
Good question. I would say if it's, I'm hoping it's.
If you're doing a
$1 million.
roof, no, I don't wanna be involved.
But if it's like handicap access, No, I don't want, from an administrative perspective, it's a lot easier for me if we go in, we run it by the select board, we're gonna do this, and this as identified by Compass, which they're gonna present to them next week, and these improvements, so we can bring it up to speed. I don't think it's necessary to have the permanent building
I don't
committee
think,
involved.
I agree.
I mean, it sounds to me like on all of the projects where there's agreement on all sides, there's no issues. It's really the sort of borderline cases where we're trying to figure out, should the building committee get involved or not?
Yeah.
And I think we need to sort of figure out how to have some language that addresses those borderline cases.
All right,
I'm not saying that anything going on in the field is, I'm sure that project is fine, but would the permanent building committee be appropriate to be involved, at least for the design and some of the oversight of the construction that's going on up there now?
so we'll
I'm not
start,
saying we should or not, I'm just,
so we'll continue to draft language, and we'll, once we kind of form a consensus, we'll,
I would ask that, it's something like that, you have council weigh in before you finalize it amongst you, because I don't want you to get to a point where you think you're over the goal line, and then for Lauren to weigh in and say, that's not right. I'd like you to have a draft and, show, with all these changes.
oh, yeah.
chapter,
Any guidance, though? Like, concrete guidance, like,
has she looked at any of the questions that we set forward
No.
yet, or not yet? Okay.
I can have her take a look at everything after this, if you'd
After we,
like.
okay. Chapter 22 is the Building Maintenance Advisory Committee.
So,
Next ones we had
my notes on
questions
that one. Bullet point 1, is the Building Maintenance Advisory Committee worth appointing or continuing? Response, no, not at this time. Over my time here, they've never been active, period. Our department heads overseeing conducting annual inspections, maintaining records of state and municipal buildings. This is of state of the municipal buildings. Yes, they are. For example, each summer, the building inspection department and fire run through the building along with Don Anderson, inspect all the fire alarms, fire escapes, making sure it's up to code just to start school in the fall. So it's done yearly, and they keep records of it.
So is it a board is it something that we should leave in the bylaws, or something that if it's not current and hasn't been current active in your 18 years?
I'd get it out, honestly. I'm assuming when this was written, we didn't have a building maintenance department, and we do now, so,
Again, that's a select board appointing, is the appointing authority on that?
yeah. We've never had one.
We would be in theory.
Do departments heads have a punch list that they go through
Yeah,
for maintenance?
oh, yeah.
They
And
do.
when they notice something, they call Don out on it, and he has to address it before school starts. I keep referring to the schools because that's one that, obviously, they're concerned with, and that's, yes.
Yeah, I think, one of the questions that I had about this Maintenance Advisory Committee, I understand that a lot of the departments have taken over the responsibilities directly for performing these annual maintenance checks. And that in the course of doing their building inspections, they may come across issues that need to be addressed. And it seems to me, and this is a point that I raised earlier, that unless I'm mistaken, it doesn't seem like there's a central clearinghouse where all of these maintenance issues come together for prioritization in terms of things like budget allocations and getting sort of a picture town-wide of what needs to be maintained and improved. And I know that this was an issue, I guess, a couple of years ago when the fields were being discussed, that, there was, I guess there wasn't really a sense of a central clearinghouse where you could go to get all this information. Now, I understand that may not have actually been the case, but that was certainly an issue that was raised. So would there be any value in having the department heads contribute their maintenance observations to a committee of this sort?
Generally, that's what the capital budget committee does. They take in the overall improvements and priorities that are not only suggested by and requested by the school business manager and Don Anderson, our building maintenance superintendent, but at all departments. They take those in, they set the priorities, they determine which ones should be recommended for funding, pass on those recommendations to FinCom, and then ultimately town meeting.
So capital budget committee within a certain threshold, I think smaller, are you talking about big ticket items?
Yeah, I mean, maintenance covers maintenance, right? It's all maintenance issues.
Boiler, a broken window, or
Yeah,
are you
things
talking about like bigger type,
That may not be covered under
infrastructure,
the
sewer and
capital.
water type projects?
Yeah,
I honestly, David, was thinking the same response as you were saying, stating the question, that really capital budget, that 5-year plan,
Yeah.
you'll see in the capital budget plan, especially when it comes to the school, because it will be listed, high school, Johnson, Elm, and there's always something for each school. Could be driveway, could be windows, could be roof.
We've actually extended it. We've added a 6th column on top of that called out years. And when you see it published, I have the 4 elementary schools on there, improvements. I have a placeholder of $25 million for each school. So we've expanded it beyond that. I don't think 25 would cut it at this point, just knowing what I know from my experience with the middle school and from our preliminary discussions with the high school project. 25 million isn't gonna get us very far, but I do have out-year placeholders for those.
And the department heads have their own 5-year plans, so I think we see Jim's list 5 years and out years, but Parks has their own, am I correct, Jim? Parks has their own,
That's part of the 5-year capital plan. It lists everything else.
Lists everything that they
Everything from
have,
school
okay.
to parks to
I
fire and
think
police.
part of the hard,
schools.
this permanent building committee is all, and according to our bylaws, is supposed to go to each building, create the document, bring it to town meeting every year. And so part of David's point of view is that, where do you find this information for all of our municipal buildings? What's next in line? You
we
know,
have
like-
that information that can be shared with anybody at any time. Do you feel like it's not available to you?
no, that's not it. I just want to make sure that all this information is being considered, from a townwide perspective, and if capital budget's doing that,
The
then that's
capital
fine.
budget's the mechanism for that.
Yeah, and if that information is available, in, either their meeting minutes or on the town
And we
website.
publish it in the warrant that's distributed out to all the residents. We actually we used to only do it once a year. Because we've switched the cycles with capital budget, I decided let's just publish it in the spring warrant too, so it was in both.
I mean, as long as they're considering all of the maintenance issues, then I'm fine with disposing of the.
To the question about whether the committee is itself necessary, I don't know if I have the answer. I mean, it doesn't sound like we utilize it.
I just want to make a correction to what I told you, appointed by the moderator.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So are we saying basically that it's kind of obsolete at this point?
Yes.
Because you, yeah.
Sounds like, yeah.
Well, if Jim said 18 years as assistant and town administrator, has not been active once. So,
Good strike.
not very current. All right, chapter 45 was the next section, which was town council.
Okay. So bullet point 1, how often does select board interact with town council and what are the capabilities and capacities? Honestly, it depends on the situation. Glenn and I talked a little bit about this today. It really depends on how serious it is. If it's a personnel matter, if at times, all 6 union contracts have the select board identified as a step 3 grievance. The department head generally, police, fire chief, DPW director. This is step 1. Step 2 is this my office, and then step 3 is the select board. So if it's something serious and we need counsel at that, we'll have labor counsel there that evening. We have a land use discussion coming up in the near future with the select board. We're gonna have someone from KP Law there to talk them through. Here's where we're at currently with this particular issue. When we were dealing with the larger 40B in South Walpole, council not only would confer with the select board, but it was more with the zoning board of appeals and dealt with them in executive session multiple times. So it changes it varies by a case-by-case basis. So some years it can be very much. I think Glenn's first year on the board, you haven't really dealt with council too much.
Couple
you know,
times.
With her coming before the board, it's more or less, if you have a question, board members generally go through the town administrator and say, I'd like to speak to council about this particular matter. That, if he had a prior experience on the Sewer and Water or Conservation Commission, yeah, sure, of course, but it is generally funneled through the administrator's office, and same goes for department heads at that level. They know that we don't like to see them rack up the legal bills if it's unnecessary. If we have some past history there, or maybe I've already asked council this question, or we've dealt with this particular labor issue before, and if it's a newer department head, yeah, we dealt with that problem in the DPW 10 years ago, and here's how we handled it, so. Next question was, is a procedure used by town boards and committees to request opinions of council running smoothly without divulging sensitive information? How often is it used? Once again, very often, depending on the board. Jack Wiley, Conservation Commission Chair, was in my office on Friday talking about some other conservation issue he's dealing with. With a long-term chairman like that, he understands what the process is and the give and the take. If it's a newer chairman, they'll generally work with the town administrator, or if I'm out, Patrick, and work through it. But the process, and the department heads know the process too. You have to come to the administrator first, so we're not wasting money. And council honestly won't, she'll come, there's been incidences where people have gone directly to council, and she'll reach out to me and say, what are your, would you like me to respond? And I've said, the person should come through this office.
Yeah, I make a practice of, if it's an email, copying the town administrator, and I try to copy the chair of the select board. If I'm gonna reach out to council, I'll copy town administrator and the chair of the select board, so they're aware. If they have an issue, then they'll mention the issue, but if it's not an issue, then the correspondence can go forward. But that's just, I think that's a general courtesy, is I don't pick up the phone and call town council when I feel like it. You kind of loop everybody in.
Okay, so that's so Jim, you're acting as sort of a gatekeeper to make sure that, we're keeping costs down and not bothering town council with, a bunch of stuff that we already have answers for.
Yeah, and if it's one of those, I also don't want to be seen as a preventer of distributing information. So if I think it's serious enough too, I'll tell the board, listen, years ago we may have dealt with this, but I think it's important that laws may have changed, council weigh in on it, so, yeah. So next question here is, in your opinion, the town officer eligible to request legal advice? The charter section 7.6 seems to indicate RTMs are elected officers of the town, and who else the select board might authorize to make these requests. Clarify the language, town officer. My response was, this question to the town officers never really come up. Generally, if a town official would like access to the council, once again, they'd start with the administrator. And unless it's something totally ridiculous, I can't point to one right off the top of my head that I've denied access, unless, we already have that answer. Here's where we stand with it. I actually asked the town clerk to weigh in on this one too. And for her comment was, the town officer to her was when she was on the Bylaw Committee. She served years ago on that. And it meant only department heads that were able to contact town council after permission was granted by the administrator. This was intent on keeping everyone from, just as I've said before, contacting council and increasing costs. So as a former member of this committee, that's the way she remembered it too.
All right.
Right now, as you know, I'm being sued from some company
Yep.
for
I think it's the fee,
arbitrary
right?
and capricious
Yeah.
rate setting, I think, basically. And what I was thinking is, instead of going the legal route, which they did, why didn't they they could have talked to you. And maybe we could have made some sort of a compromise in that particular situation that they had. Looking that case over,
Yeah.
I could see that we could possibly do something like that. Do they ever get you involved in trying to be a mediator?
The particular case I'm thinking of, not until after they filed the suit.
Okay, then why did that,
We've had other cases, without specifying on this specific one. I think years ago, with the water tower or something in South Walpole with one of the car dealerships or something like that, they wanted access to our water, and they had pursued us on that one. And I think Michael at the time helped to serve as the mediator, but in this particular case, they just decided they wanted to get the building constructed.
okay.
And they decided to contend this after the facility was constructed.
The courts in Massachusetts recently have been asking for mediation before they go to trial. Are you aware of that happening with civil cases? And if that does happen, and they say, you folks need to sit down before we bring this to trial, what's gonna be the procedure then? And I'm talking about like our specific case, because I know that
I
one.
can't speak to that specific case, but I can speak to the last time we dealt with mediation in this particular building. It was over a grievance with the union. We sat all day with one of the particular unions. They sat in one room, we sat in another. We each were assigned a mediator, and the mediators basically came in and sat with myself and town council and the head of the department, said, okay, this is what they're offering. And they would keep leaving the room. Eventually, we got a deal done at the end of the day. It took all day, which I was glad it only took a day, but that's
So are
maybe
you-
what I would
Are you
envision,
looking
but
for something about mediation to be added into the bylaw?
Well, no, because I'm trying to think of, how would you even put that in the bylaw? You know what I mean? Because in the end, the commission would have to make the final determination because it would be it's always about money. They
But-
would,
Pat, if we're doing the bylaw review and we're talking about how is town council used, once we get to mediation, we've already followed a protocol of how like, if we're getting to the point of mediation, we've called town council in.
yeah, because the town council will be involved in that.
Right.
And maybe I don't know, that's what I'm saying.
So, to stay on track, or just if you wanted to talk about adding language of mediation into here, but
No, I mean, I think, you know, I haven't been through this process myself, but my understanding is that when there's a lawsuit, the judge has the option to refer the situation pre-trial to mediation or arbitration. And the terms and conditions for how all of that will happen will be set out in the judge's order. So I think, you know, Ally, as you said, that happens after council's already involved.
I was thinking it would save us money. That's
I
what I
know.
was thinking.
And unfortunately, when it comes to legal opinions in town matters, once you're getting to mediation, I don't think there's much savings for the budget of the town council.
Are we gonna go to an in-house town council ever, back again?
I am very comfortable with the labor council and town council we have in place right now.
And so you don't think we should look for an in-house?
No.
Would that save us money?
Our legal budget is $250,000. I honestly don't think it will. I've had prior members of the select board look at it who are actually lawyers, and I've said, tell me if you think we're being charged an outrageous amount of money. Al DiNapoli's the last one I had, and he said, do you know how much I charge an hour? I said, no. And he said, a lot more than that. And I think we're getting a very good deal as far as our council
Are we
service.
still using the same law firm?
So it's KP Law, the
Yeah.
case you're talking about, Greg's handling that one,
Okay.
but yeah. And Kevin Feely and Brown.
But they're defending me.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, then this goes into the conflict of interest protection, what do we have in place? So we've utilized KP laws, in the bylaws, it talks about select board being the, renewing that kind of contract with KP law. I think Pat just asked in-house or not, and I think that's the advantage of us using KP law, is that we have access to lawyers
Specialized counsel.
with specialties in today's world between conservation, personnel, you need to have access to all of that. But David, this was more of your question.
Yeah, and actually, to the point of costs, there are advantages for contracting out with a firm, because if you hire the counsels in-house and they work for the town, they're on a salary,
Health insurance.
and health insurance, and all benefits, right? And they get paid whether or not they're doing any work. Whereas if you contract out to the law firm, they'll bill, I don't know what the current contract is, but it's typically by the hour.
Yeah.
And
They have a small retainer, a few $1,000s a month, that I think
Yeah.
it's 4,000, so.
Yeah, and then they invoice for whatever is left. But then we're only paying them when we need to use them. So in a lot of cases, it is cheaper to hire out.
Yeah. So as far as the conflict of interest question, that question was, what kind of conflict of interest protections are in place for the town of Walpole. If the firm that represents Walpole also represents other communities that Walpole is doing business with. I could tell you we've actually dealt with this specific situation within the last 6 months. We had an insurance claim that we were dealing with, and it involved another community. It was personnel-related matter, and Council KP Law said we also represent that community. So I said, respectfully, I'm not going to involve you in this claim. I'm going to use Labor Council, who also, fortunately, not only serves as Labor Council in other communities, but also serves as Town Council for multiple communities. So I used Labor Council and the council assigned by the insurance company. And I always like to back it, because the insurance company's counsel always comes in and they say, we're working for you, Town of Walpole, but in my head, I get the best deal, again, with the least amount of liability and risk involved. So I leaned on Feely and Brown for their expertise, and we worked through it. It was fine, and they understood, like, I'm leaving you out of this KP Law because I know you also represent that town.
And I know it's possible to get waivers if everybody agrees, but I think this may also be an issue with water and sewer and other like intermunicipal agreements. You know, if we're doing any kind of, you know, water hookups with, you know, neighboring towns or something like that.
Pat knows it well. The situation we dealt with some time ago on the town of Sharon, we have an intermunicipal agreement for that hotel that who knows if it's going to actually be built. Straddles Walpole, and fortunately, KP Law doesn't represent Sharon. But in that particular case, we'd obviously probably look to use some type of an outside counsel. It's great when they have experts in areas of conservation, zoning board, 40Bs, but every once in a while we get that case where there's a conflict. They disclose it up front.
All right, David, we're good on council?
Oh, yeah.
All right, so,
Real quick on this one, the third bullet point, I mean, are we recommending that town officer be clarified? Or we change the language to, you know, kind of town administrator's office or something like that?
Your question, I mean,
You could do that. I mean, you guys could discuss that and decide and bring it to us, but, I mean, the town administrator's office essentially is the central full, you know, clearinghouse, and, yeah, I mean, that makes sense, under the direction of the select board, certainly.
Yeah, I think it might make sense to put some language in the bylaws to sort of make that function clear.
yeah.
You know, that this is why we're going through the town administrator, and these are the functions that you're performing.
I mean,
I don't want to preclude you know, a department head, though, if they're technically an officer, from being able to, you know, if they disagree with Jim, I mean, and you're the gatekeeper, now how do I gain access to council?
That could create a problem,
Yeah.
honestly. Council's gonna come to me. I'm gonna say,
yeah,
What do I do? Don't answer that guy.
I think if they disagree with the town administrator, then it comes to the select board.
I'm sure they would, honestly.
If it came to that.
Well, I don't know, Jim, you said that you wouldn't, you know, refuse any reasonable request, and I take it your word, I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really, honestly, my concern would be, they go, well, okay, well, Jim's not gonna let me have access, I'm gonna go back to the board members and say, you know, this is the problem I have, and he won't allow me to have access, and if I reasonably say no, in my head, I need to be able to, I always second guess, okay, are they gonna go to the select board and question that? I'd rather put the fire out before it gets to board members.
all right, chapter 125, meeting of town boards.
Okay, question was clarification of which town boards appointed or elected requires meetings to be recorded and made available for public viewing. So my question is, what's the specific question? My additional comment to that would be, I'd be hesitant to putting a means and a methods to how boards are covered in the bylaws. This should really be at the discretion of the board or the committee. I know generally, someone asked me about this today, generally, select board is taped, FinCom's taped. In the past, you know, when I was the assistant, FinCom was not taped. I know sewer and water was not taped in the past. I remember you bringing tape recorders to the meeting, right? Yeah.
That's correct.
So it's, this recording, especially with COVID, has really evolved and changed over especially the last 2 years. Zoning board too, planning board's always been taped, I believe. So it's kind of evolved, but there's smaller boards and committees. One that comes to mind is the Capital Budget Committee. Generally, they meet in a small room and they interview the department heads. Other than COVID, I don't recall them being taped. It also comes down to a personnel availability as far as Walpole Media has. Tamara has Patrick and a few other people, but there's been nights where we have 2 to 3 meetings going on in this building. And if we have Capital also on that Tuesday night, you just simply can't tape it. That's kind of my general thoughts on that one.
I'm gonna make enemies with this one comment, but I look at one elected board that's not taped that maybe should be, and that's assessors.
Really want to make enemies, huh?
Well, the bylaw states open sessions and meetings of elected boards to be available and be
Elected,
broadcast.
that's the
Yeah.
key.
That's what the bylaws say, elected boards to be available for broadcast by cable television.
Yeah, I think to your point, Jim, like what's the here? It's some boards are elected and some are appointed.
Yeah,
And the bylaw says specifically elected, it doesn't say appointed.
yeah. I know for FinCom, and I know you're taped tonight, I think that you welcome that for transparency. FinCom, I think I'm safe to say that the same thing with them. So, would you like to tweak that as far as some appointed boards, maybe? Assessors is really the only one I can think of that's
It's
not.
the only outlier beyond, of elected.
Ally, can you
But
repeat
then
that
again, I
language?
mean, the board, it's a 3-member board as well with.
Open sessions of meetings of elected boards to be available for broadcast by cable television.
Yeah, I mean, you could even soften the language, if anything, and say, elected and appointed boards should be when possible. I mean, that's not the best
Yeah.
language, but just,
I know.
I mean, to open it up to, I mean, again, to say we have to devote resources when we might not have the resources available, does
Right, but
does the committee not meet in that case? I mean, that sounds like you're sort of creating an
But
issue.
that gray
for yourself.
area where now boards that are elected that are currently being consistently available for broadcast, then say, well, now it's gray, we lessen the language. So it doesn't have to be, videoed anymore.
Yeah.
So,
So is that something you may want to go back and forth with and draft some type of clarification of that?
I think so.
Is Housing Authority?
I think I've seen Housing
I
Authority.
think they are.
Yeah,
Library?
I don't think I've seen library, but.
Generally, they're one of the ones that meet in one of those smaller meeting rooms. I've seen them, I've met with them in the glass meeting room upstairs.
So the language is specific on that one.
So we have 2 or 3 elected that don't.
Yeah. So if you want, we can work together. And are you guys assigning, like, okay, Jeff and David are gonna handle this particular one we're talking about? Like, it'd be helpful for me if you guys came to me and said, listen, here's what we're thinking of. Will you weigh in? And then
We do,
we'll hash it out, the 3 of us, and then have council review it. Maybe, that would be helpful if there's
we
some,
have a list of every chapter that we've kind of said, we'll kind of head that one. So we'll
Yeah.
get that list to you.
okay.
Um,
So, chapter 177, records and reports. Is the board and committee record system running smoothly? Response, generally yes. Is anyone still using record books or are all records being kept electronically? Is there a mix? There are generally some boards, especially the administrative assistants who, Kate Delaney comes to mind, and I know Cindy she was still here, she took very quick notes, but Aoife just types along as we go. I know Liz does keep each year she goes back, she has about $45,000 to $6,000, varies every year, available for changing the older records over to electronic. So, I don't know if that directly answers your question, but generally everybody does it electronically and files them with Liz that way.
I think this question, when we were discussing this, was the timeframe of when minutes are posted online, agendas are posted, and is there kind of specific timelines for those items? So even for this board, when we went back to 2004, I think they had to get taken from the attic to
Yeah.
be copied for us so that we could see what the last board did. So I think it was a question of, for all these different boards and committees, when you go online, sometimes you cannot find current information for minutes being posted in those records.
That's an accurate statement, and I can tell you that we don't have, right now, I don't have the resources to go back, and we try to do some of them, but we don't have all of them up online. Oh, I thought the question was, how are they taking?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think it's a mix.
Your question is, how are they available?
taken? Because,
I think Conservation Commission does a good job. I think I've been on there, and they have minutes and agendas pretty well posted for going back probably a year or even longer.
Yeah.
And the Select Board does a good job, but again, I don't think it's across the board necessarily, and I don't know, is that a priority? Or is that something that we'd want to look at? You know, it could probably be improved, I guess is what we're saying.
I think
I
that's
mean,
what-
yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is that it would be nice if there were some consistency there, because, you know, I'll go on the, you know, Walpole government website, and I'll look up, you know, say I want the meeting, you know, minutes of FinCom, well, you know, they're there. Or, but then I go to, you know, a different board, and there's just nothing.
Guaranteed FinCom are the delayed ones, but.
So again, all these
Yes.
things are available. It's just a question of, are they available at the click of a mouse versus are they available by coming down to town hall and
Coming to town
requesting it
hall,
and usually getting a.
Honestly, I mean, if,
Yeah.
the important one for me is posted agendas. When there's a posted public meeting, it should be on that committee or that department's website. If it's posted on the bulletin board, it should be there electronically. That's the big one for me.
So I think we were kind of talking about clarification of setting more of a timeline, that it should be there.
We can work on it.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's, I feel like that's not necessarily a bylaw question, maybe I'm wrong about that, it's more a question of, can we just administratively do that? I mean, do you wanna put that in the bylaw, is that what you're
Well,
suggesting?
but when you're reading the respective records made available for public inspection and things like that, so we were just like, well, how would someone, you know, nowadays it's usually technology you're getting online, but if things aren't posted online in a timely manner, we were said, thankfully, you know, nothing, but how far have we gotten our records backed up electronically? If, you know, the meeting minutes from 2004 are in the attic, what if there was ever a fire? Like, how are our records being kept? How far back have we gone that we have a more current means to do it? And you may not have the answer to that, you know?
Yeah, and I guess, you know, I just learned that the town clerk has a budget specifically, you know, devoted to digitizing these older records, and I'm very happy to hear that. I don't know if anyone would care to weigh in and provide a guess as to how long it's going to take to digitize all of the records that we have. I mean,
They all
given,
need to be.
you know,
Long time. You know, a few years ago, when Marilyn was a finance director, she went forward with I think it was $20,000 request to digitize a lot of her records, and, you know, but they weren't really for the purpose of public consumption. It was for us to keep the records so she didn't have to store them all in the attic. I didn't really think as much that this was going in that direction, but I can work with you on that, Ally, and try to get I'll get a better answer for you.
So it's more having something in the bylaw for consistency, for posting public meeting agendas. I think that's what we were thinking about, when, if we were gonna revise this bylaw, is a consistency across for all the boards
Yeah.
appointed and elected.
Okay.
In general, as well as, I'd like to get away from paper. Just-
Yeah, okay, so adding electronic reference to the bylaw, is that where this is going? That it should be
That's what our
posted digitally?
discussion- Right,
Yeah.
because we drafted these back in April.
Yeah.
It took us you know, to get to this point tonight.
So we do, just looking at the website right now, we do have pretty much all the, all the EDC, yeah, meetings listed out and everything. So we try to do the ZBA, planning board, but if you want something more specific, we can list that out. And I'm only looking out towards the end of June, so.
Okay. All right, we're almost done. Chapter 182, Recreation Committee. The question came up, a number of associate members determined and how they are appointed.
Okay. Patrick weighed in on this one as a former recreation director. He said, if anything, I'd like to remove the provision in this section that says the recreation director appointed by the town administrator shall be subject to and under the control of the recreation committee. It's kind of just funky that the TA appoints it, and it's under the control of the Recreation Committee. So that was his 2 cents as a former director there. But how are the number of associate members determined and appointed? Response, 5 associate members are appointed by the Board of Select Board. On October of 2012, the Select Board voted to increase the associate members from 2 to 5. Aoife went back and looked at that vote for me, so that's where it came from. They just voted to increase it back in 2012.
So, for me, this was more of a general question. It came up under the Recreation Committee, because that's one of the boards I'm on, or committees I'm on. I wasn't sure how associate members are determined. You know, FinCom doesn't have associate members. Other boards don't have associate members. Why is it that the Recreation Committee does and certain others do, and others don't? I mean, was there a?
I can tell you, honestly, I think, I don't remember the vote in October 2012, but I'm assuming that at the time, Josh was probably the director, so people wanted more involvement, and they wanted more outreach into the community, and what better way to do that than expand the committee? We've done that with the Council on Aging, and most recently, I believe, the last couple months, we voted to downsize that committee, or we're discussing it. I can't remember if they're voting to downsize that, because quite honestly,
The
Kerry
EDC got downsized.
the EDC, yeah. But I think Kerry's having a similar problem with, or was having a similar problem with the Council on Aging. They had so many vacancies, they had an issue with, we may not get a quorum tonight because you couldn't get members on there, and they kept expanding it. As far as the ZBA, we need those associate members when people are absent or something. Those associate members serve as actual members on whatever case they're deliberating.
It doesn't sound like there's any clear formula on how.
No, there isn't, yeah.
No, to that, yeah. And the Trails Committee, just as an example, was growing in popularity, and a lot of people wanted to join. I said, well, we only have 5 spots available, but we don't want to turn you away. We wanted the involvement, and it's kind of an inconsequential committee, to be honest with you. I mean, we do fun things, you know, I don't think we're, you know, doing anything too
New
big.
Year's Day, 8 AM.
So,
We added, my point was that we added several associate positions just to make room for more involvement.
okay, so just, I guess, for my clarification, to sort of repeat something that you said, Jim. For the ZBA, these associate members are really more in the manner of alternates.
Yes,
So if somebody doesn't show up, then another person can step in.
yeah, or if they have a conflict, yeah.
And then
Because
on-
So
need
they
it.
have no voting power unless they have to step in as a full member.
Yes, but they do have, the ZBA chair
That's
at
not-
times allows them to contribute to the discussion.
But is that consistent across all boards? Like, Board of Health has associate members, but I don't think they have any voting regardless of the quorum.
I don't believe they do. Generally, those associate members serve as their farm system, from what I can recall, and, you know, they get promoted up when someone leaves.
All right. Next was concerning chapter 187 revolving funds.
Sure. So the question here was, are pending limits of revolving funds accurate, or is it necessary to increase? So I have all the revolving funds, and Jody and I actually discussed this evening. She's reviewing all these. There's one fund that jumped out to me. It's called the Turco Field Maintenance and Turf Replacement Fund. If we're going to make a change, I would suggest that we just call it the Field Maintenance and Turf Replacement Fund, given the fact that we now have 3 turf fields. Little things like that, like the net metering fund, we established that within the last 5 years. We actually went back to town meeting to increase the limit. It's $1.3 million. And this year, we were informed by the DOR that they didn't like, that fund actually, there's no reason to have that fund around anymore, because they said the way you were taking in those funds, they wanted us to change it. And I made note of that in my budget presentation. So that one could be done away with. And that's as simple as each year, we used to have to vote on these revolving funds, and with the municipal reform bill that was passed within the last 5 to 7 years, they don't require you to come back to town meeting every single year unless you change the amount, the limits. So there are some changes there that she would suggest. Those are just 2 of them. She was gonna work on getting you guys a list when you're ready for that.
Okay. And that was the only question. That select board, chapter 195, we had no questions, and then chapter 219, town meeting. The current language references town meeting warrant is posted in 2 public places within each precinct. Should that language be changed?
I would like it to be changed to actually, so the way this works, and forgive me, but I don't know which, Aoife has it written down from, that Cindy had carried over, and working with Rick Stillman and the chief before that, Chief Petro. It's always been in the same place, and then they're odd places, like.
Yeah, I actually found,
So, 'cause
I
we were
found where they
discussing,
were
we were like-
posted, and it was actually listed where they're posted.
Really?
But do we keep that requirement, I guess, you know? Because they were obscure locations, like,
I would suggest make it available
We
online.
personally could not think of public spaces in all of these 8 precincts where postings would be. So when we were discussing this, is it current?
My suggestion would be to make it available online, make it available at town hall, in the town clerk's office, in the library, and leave it at that, because each year, especially with Chief Kelleher, he's like, what places were this again? And he had only done it once, I think, as the deputy, so that would be my suggestion.
Ally, on the town meeting, I contact the people in my precinct about once a month, just to say anything. I got one
Response?
person respond to me so far. And their concern was the time. Time is 7:30. They're thinking an earlier time. And actually, this lady said 6:30. And I just want to bring it out to you folks. What do you think about that? That came from one of the people in precinct 3.
so this is a town charter item though, right? This would be a town charter item though, right?
I think that will be.
Time, I think, is town charter, is it?
Right.
Changing the time? of
Yeah.
But the
those?
warrant
the
was
date and-
bylaw, the town, I think this is town charter.
Charter say on 7:30?
Yeah, and I think we weren't gonna touch charter, or no? Because I did have the one comment about the capital versus the OpEx, spring versus town.
Charter is much larger, though, and not in the scope of this committee, as far as I know. And anytime we've talked about a rewrite of the charter, that was quite expensive.
It is in the charter, charter, town meeting shall meet annually at 7:30 on the pertinent matters, and it goes into the dates. And, one of the things that I dealt with, especially during COVID and even after COVID, we've been meeting on Saturdays. I know some people don't like that. I know the town moderator tried to kind of get a consensus, and everybody held up their cards, and he laughed because it seemed like it was split 50-50. The council weighed in on this. The reason we were allowed to do it this year on a Saturday, she said it's discretionary, not directory. Ultimately, it was the select board's call as to when to make it. That's why they decided to go with 10 a.m. on a Saturday in May. So one of my questions for the board over the summer is, when do you want to have town meeting? Do you want to go back to the Monday nights at 7:30? But the charter specifically says 7:30, so.
I'll tell her that.
Now, I talked with Dan Bruce about this after the meeting. And I know that during the COVID period, we switched over to Saturdays and outdoors because of the emergency order, right? Governor Baker's order. And I had a question about the last meeting that we had in May, because that emergency order had been rescinded. And so I had a question. I asked him, how are we still doing this on Saturday? And what he told me was that it's possible for the town meeting to meet officially at 7:30 on a Monday and then continue the meeting immediately to the following Saturday or to some other date that's, desired.
Yeah.
150 people are gonna come together on a Monday night to continue a discussion? I don't think so. That's not gonna happen.
Yeah, well, so I remember having that discussion, especially when we were worried about, well, if we have it on, one of the days we delayed by a couple of hours, and we had to meet early, moderator and like 2 town meeting members vote to open and delay it until 1 o'clock or something like that. I don't remember the discussion about meeting on the Monday night, but I had her weigh in, and I said, Lauren, I just want to make sure we're okay here, we're an okay standing, and that's the way it's discretionary for the select board. Ultimately, it's their decision when to set it, so.
Even though the terms of the charter are, as you say, black and white.
Yeah.
It's still discretionary.
Yeah, it's one of those things, I think, shall doesn't always have to mean you must, or something like that. It
Like you
means-
talk to a
yeah,
lawyer, all right, I get it.
Shall is gray.
Yeah, so I'm getting, Bridget's been texting me, they need me in that school building committee meeting. Neighbors are asking where town administration is, so,
All
do
right.
you mind
Nope,
if I take
we're-
off
that was all our questions. We're reviewing minutes. Thank you so much, Jim, for joining us.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks, and,
The community forum still going on?
It's
no, they're asking where
it's
I am,
letter.
so,
It was the
all right,
second
thank you
point
all.
for just a
Appreciate
minute.
it.
Well, thank you for taking the
Thanks.
time.
No problem.
Thank you, Jim. All right, so that was the drafting of our questions, review by town administrator. I think we have to meet again to really see what we want to make for those specific questions based on those answers. So we'll set
And it sounds like we definitely have a few challenges with some of these chapters, and, you know, especially in hammering out further language. I mean, you know, to me, this meeting was more about figuring out what needs to be done. And then, you know, the work that we have ahead of us is to actually get the language set up that everyone agrees on, town council and.
And so that's, the warrant closes, I think, August 23rd or something like
It
that.
triggers some questions, and I was thinking of Jeff,
Yeah.
and I think you might have a new job within the commission.
Yeah, afraid of
August
that.
23rd.
You probably know what I'm talking about.
So that would be our next step, I think, to meet again and decide what, based on those answers, what recommendations we want to go forward. To say that we can get these recommendations drafted and vetted out through Jim,
So,
Select Board, and Town Council before the warrant closes and have it already drafted and ready before August 20th would be
so
tight.
we can ask for an extension, but why don't we narrow the list and, you know, make a commitment to get
A few.
recommendation for 3, 4, 10 of these for August, and we'll ask for an extension on the rest of them.
We can do that, because we've already said that Gatable Patrol is not ready to be touched yet, which needs quite a bit of work.
Yeah, and I mean, we're gonna need an extension to deal with that anyway.
Okay.
So what's the charter of this committee? Like length of time? Why isn't it just an ongoing bylaw review committee? With an endless, you know,
Let's change it. I think that's in the bylaws.
Yeah, I mean, the charter says, meet at, well, it says meet at, no more than 5-year intervals thereafter. So if you would like to participate on an ongoing basis.
On 04, right, 04 was the last,
I think
those were the,
some-
so 04 to
It's been more than 5 years.
and it's a moderator appointed,
moderator appointed.
but we were appointed in the precinct, weren't we?
Moderate,
We kind of,
Oh,
we
okay,
chose
yeah,
to
we-
volunteer.
Kinda
Oh,
chose
we
to
were
volunteer.
We were
And then Dan
volunteered
said,
by
"Yeah,
our
you."
fellow, our team members.
each precinct kind of came forward with a member
So
that,
which
There's a
precinct are we missing?
Victim.
8. But I think waiting for that election to see if there's new people elected in, that would interest, so I'll reach out to Dan about getting 8 filled. And there was 2 that have somewhat expressed interest, so follow up
And
with that.
long-term, what's your plan?
I don't know yet, we'll see.
Are you with us through August?
I would like to, I, as elected to select board, but on an appointed committee, I can still stay on.
Yep.
So, this is probably one of my easier committees.
Yes.
So am I thinking, do we want to look at dates?
I'm out.
You're
I'm-
out in July.
I'm bye-bye.
There you go. Nothing looks good for me, I'll tell you that.
The whole month?
You're gone for the whole month, July.
I'm gone, starting in, as soon as the boss says leave.
Yep.
We're back down the Cape.
Do we want to turn it over as quick as trying to get one more in June, and then,
I think with how much work we have ahead of us before August, I personally would like to get as much done as we can for the fall warrant.
I'm available in August, though.
well, it's just more that it's due by the 23rd.
23rd of June?
Like, the warrant closes the 23rd of August.
Oh,
which means that we would have to have all the language set and ready. And already
Vetted
get
by
it.
council, and we don't know what her schedule's gonna be, and,
Right.
yeah.
Do we want to try to do 2 weeks, the 28th? That Tuesday?
28th of June.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be here. That's
Are we gonna
okay.
go?
I don't
That's all right, it's okay. If I get good notes,
I mean,
no,
The girls
they're
are on a trip to
valuable
Bahamas,
because
so
it's,
now it's me with a
it's
pen and
excellent.
video. I don't know what I can
Okay.
pull off.
I watched that.
I do too.
I was gonna
We
say,
also could circulate some of this,
I
if
can
we've
see
already
it from the
selected our
tape.
areas, we could circulate some of this through email.
But then,
I can see it from the Cape, and I can, if I have something I want to say to you, I can send you an email or something.
What was your concern, Doug?
well, if we do it through email, then it's gonna be a big, open discussion.
It's gonna be open
Every
discussion.
single
Well, I
meeting.
was thinking more if you had town council and you wanted to draft it,
yeah,
and then if we put it in posted meeting minutes?
Can everybody do Google Docs? That way somebody can, be in charge of drafting the language, everybody else can see it, make edits, revisions, comments, whatever.
I don't know how to do that.
Or I'm fine with doing a Word doc, and we
Yeah.
just, track changes. I don't
Track
like you're
changes.
reviewing a
Track changes we
contract.
can do.
That's
yeah,
fine too. I don't
yeah.
Okay, because otherwise, the only other thing I could think of is like Thursday, the 23rd, and I'm not sure any of us are really gonna get a great amount of
June
drafted
23rd?
language.
Yeah, my schedule,
We got the tour of Sharon High.
That's on the 23rd.
Yeah.
I haven't put those tours on my phone yet.
Yeah, we got Millis on Wednesday, Sharon on Thursday. Not to say I can do them, I'm just saying. I do one town thing a day, I won't do more than that.
It's at the building committee.
All right, then we're at 4th of July, see, this is where it gets tricky, then we're already at 4th of July week. If we go beyond June, which will be a challenging week, then we're at maybe like, say, July 12th,
I'm actually crazily available that week.
4th of July week?
Yeah, because we pushed off vacation to the end of the month.
I'm available on the 12th.
What about the 7th?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not available on the 5th, but otherwise my calendar's pretty much open. This is what I get for being a bachelor.
I could do the
What
7th of
what
July.
about you for the 7th?
I've got softball, but otherwise, my daughter has softball, but I could do it.
I could do the 7th of July.
Nancy?
7th? I can do the 7th.
All right, I'm around on the 7th too. All right, so we'll plan on 7,
At Pat's house?
Pat, would you,
7 at
Pat, I know
7?
you're down the Cape, and we don't want to interrupt you, but, would you be open to doing a Zoom if we could? do
I'm sorry,
that?
what?
Would you be open to doing a Zoom meeting if we could do that? If you were
It depends,
available?
we're so far away from any cell sites
Okay.
that it's,
Some connection.
Sorry, okay.
yeah, sometimes
we're gonna
we
have to come to
use,
you.
Yeah.
and it doesn't work sometimes, so I don't know about that, but
Do
I
you have
do-
a big deck on the back we could all come to?
I do have a big deck out front, you can watch the ocean.
Oh, lovely.
So the meeting will be moved to
But,
Pat's.
what I can do is I'll watch it on YouTube, and
Okay.
I'll be,
So look in your areas then before then, the areas that you had designated that you want to, that your concerns
Well,
after this
it was
meeting.
mine's contracts really, and
Okay.
some of the things that, and I always revert back to sewer and water because that's what I know. We had these two projects that we happened to do some things
Don't get
innovative.
to
with.
specifications.
Huh?
Dick, don't get too specific.
Why not?
Not on the agenda.
Just to stay with bylaw review and time.
No, it's just, I'll make it real fast. Pine Street, North Street,
Yeah.
we saved 2/3 of the contract for Pine Street and 1/3 of the contract for North Street, only because we put the water lines in backwards, and we had to take them all out and put them in frontwards, but they learned. And we still saved 1/3 of the contract. So we did it twice and still saved that. So for us, if we can get in-house people, we rented the excavator, we hired a dynamiter and stuff like that, we saved a lot of money for the
Yeah.
town. So that's why I try to pick contracts. That's it, I'm done.
All right,
So the 7th.
so this, the 7th, do we want to do a vote on the April meeting minutes? Doug, did you,
Yeah, I sent them around. I don't
did anyone?
Good.
review
I'll
them?
make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of April
28th.
28th. I did read them. They were good.
I read them, and I'll second that.
Yeah,
All right,
no revisions.
everyone approved, say
Yay.
Yay.
aye. Okay, we set the morning dates, and then that's all of our business for tonight.
Make a
So
motion to
just to
adjourn.
confirm, we're meeting on 7/7 at 7?
7 at 7.
Gotcha.
I will let you know, I will book a room and get Waffle Media and get an agenda ready.
7/7, very good.
I move to close the meeting?
I think I heard a motion to adjourn.
Motion
Is that what it
adjourned,
is?
all in favor?
Second. Aye.
Hey, folks, have a
Thank
good.
you.